We are students from Supply Chain and Logistics Management at UWS. We are exploring simple yet powerful questions. How can a small canal worry international logistics? The Panama Canal may seem like a narrow waterway, but it's one of the most important trade routes. When disruption occurs, supply chain slows down, cost rises, and effects are felt across the globe. This documentary explores how a small canal can have a massive impact on the international trade and logistics.
The Panama Canal is often described as an engineering marvel. That framing is true, but incomplete. It obscures the fact that the canal is first and foremost a political artifact, a structure whose construction, ownership, and control have been contested for over a century, and whose history reveals as much about empire and sovereignty as it does about Congress, and its idea predates the canal by nearly 400 years. Spanish explorers first proposed a passage across the isthmus in the 1500s, but it was France, emboldened by Ferdinand de Lesseps' success with the Suez Canal, that made the first serious attempt in 1881. De Lesseps tried to replicate Suez sea level design in Panama. A fatal miscalculation. Panama's geology and disease environment bore no resemblance to Egypt desert. Yellow fever and malaria killed an estimated 20,000 workers, and the French Panama Canal Company collapsed into bankruptcy by 1889 in what remains one of the largest corporate failures of the 19th century. One further chapter matters for understanding the canal today. By the early 2000s, the original locks designed for the cargo ships of 1914 could no longer accommodate the massive container vessels reshaping global trade. In a 2006 national referendum, Panamanians approved a $5.25 billion expansion project. A new wider lane of locks opened in June 2016, engineered specifically to allow so-called Neo-Panamax ship vessels nearly triple the cargo capacity of the originals to pass through.
To understand why the Panama Canal is vulnerable to something as ordinary as a trier, you first have to understand what the most people get wrong about it. The canal is not a sea level channel. It does not simply let ships sail through at ocean height the way the Suez Canal does. It is functionally a water elevator, and that distinction is the single most important fact for understanding the crisis we'll discuss later. Ships entering from either ocean are lifted through a series of chambers, massive concrete basins that fill with fresh water until the vessel floats to the level of Gatun Lake, an artificial lake sitting roughly 26 meters or 85 feet above sea level. The ship then crosses the lake, and on the far side is lowered back down through another set of locks, the level of the opposing ocean. Critically, this entire lifting mechanism operates by gravity alone. No pumps push water uphill. If delivery is used to raise a ship must come from somewhere, and that somewhere is a rainfall collected in Gatun Lake and its similar companion reservoir Alhula Lake, both fed by the Charles River. Here is the number that should reframe how you think about global shipping. Each time a single ship transits the canal, it consumes on the order of 26 gallons of fresh water, roughly 100 million liters, according to Purview research on the canal's water system. In canal century-old original logs, most of this water is discharged directly into the ocean after use. It's not recycled. It does return to the lake. It is lost from the system, transit after transit, ship after ship. To put that consumption in perspective, the canal's total daily water use is estimated at roughly 2.5 times the daily water consumption of entire city of New York, a comparison offered by the Canal Authority's own administrator. And this water is not slowly and industrial input. Gatun and Alhula lakes also supply drinking waters to more than half of Panama's population, including the capital, Panama City, and the city of Colon. In other words, ships and people are drawing from exact same finite reservoir. The 2016 expansion introduced a partial solution. The new Panamax locks include water savings basins, essentially large adjacent reservoirs that capture and receive approximately 60% of the water from each transit before it's released, making new locks roughly 7% more water efficient per transit than originals. The daily shortfall, equivalent to roughly 1,200 Olympic swimming pools, is not abstraction. It precisely the defect that forced the Canal Authority into emergency rationing measures we will hear about shortly. The core insight to carry forward is this: the Panama Canal is powered not by fossil fuels or electricity, but the climate itself. It is, in a very literal sense, a piece of critical global infrastructure that transforms weather. That is a meaningful engineering improvement, but it does not solve the underlying constraint, because the entire system's water budget still depends on variable, no engineering controls rainfall. In an average year, perceptions across the watershed replenishes the lakes sustain both shipping and drinking water demand. But the system operates with very little margin. During the 2023 drought, the Canal Authority calculated that Gatun Lake was losing approximately 10 million cubic meters of water per day to a combination of transit use, evaporation, and municipal consumption, while receiving only about 7 million cubic meters back through rainfall and river inflow.
5 to 6% of global maritime trade pass throughout the single artificial waterway, 82 kilometers long. The gap why that consequence matters. It helps to think of Panama Canal is not a shipping route among the many, but is a checkpoint. It's term of economic and logistic scholars use narrow paths throughout the which a disruption share of global trades must be followed, and whose disruptions therefore carries the consequences for beyond physical footprint. The United States is by the wide maritime, the canal's principles beneficially, somewhere between 17 and 17.3% of all cargo transits to the canal either organize its destination for all the United States, and the canal carry a estimated 14% of all US containers traffic. China is the second largest user, nearly half of all containers traffic moving from Northeast Asia to US East Coast. Container ship carrying consumer goods appear electronics, furniture, toy represent the largest category by vessel count. But the canals equally vital energy trade. Liquefied natural gas, liquefied petroleum gas carried move USA ship sells gas export to buyers across Asia. The economic scale is considerable. The canal hurdles of cargo valued approximately $270 billion annually. For shipping companies, using the canal instead of alternative routes is estimated to save order to $12 to $14 billion in a year in fuel. The time and crew cost is normally operating year. For Panama itself, canal's function as a central pillar of national economic policy. It generates over $1 billion in annually revenues. Equivalently, the roughly 6 to 7% of country's entire gross domestic products and around the fifth of global government revenues. This is essential the context for everything that follows in the documentary. When they discuss about 2023-24 drought its disruptions, we are not describing a localized inconvenience to one Central American country. We are describing a disruption, a piece of infrastructure that a meaningful share of global economy, from America farmers to Chinese electronic export to Japanese energy importers, depends on functioning normally every single day. A check in the one waterway does not say contain out to Panama. Its progress to outweigh throughout the global supply chain trade makers, and ultimately consumer price.
So what happened to Panama Canal? The crisis at Panama Canal. Infrastructure failures are usually mechanical. A bridge collapse, a power grid overloads. The Panama Canal crisis of 2023 and 2024 was different and in some way more unsettling precisely because nothing broke. No lock failed, no lake wall gave away. The system worked exactly as designed. The problem was that the input, the entire design depends on rain, simply didn't arrive. 2023 was one of the driest years on the record for the canal's watershed, with rainfall coming in roughly 30% below the historic average. Forces combined to produce this. The first was El Nino, a recurring natural occurring warming pattern in the Eastern Pacific Ocean that reliably suppresses rainfall across Central America. El Nino events are not new. The canal has weathered them before. What made 2023 different was the second factor. A global warming climate is intensifying these natural cycles. 2023 was, at the time, the hottest year recorded globally, and rising air and ocean temperatures do two things simultaneously. They make El Nino-driven droughts more severe, and they increase evaporation from the lakes themselves, compounding the water deficit from both ends. A peer-reviewed study published in Geophysical Research Letters led by researchers including Samuel Muniz at Northeastern University modeled these risks forward and found that under higher emission climate scenarios, droughts of this severity at Gatun Lake are projected to become substantially more frequent over the coming decades, meaning 2023 may be remembered not as an anomaly but as a preview. Faced with a shrinking reservoir that also supplies drinking water to more than half the country's population, the Panama Canal Authority had only one meaningful lever: ration the canal itself. The results were severe and cascading. Normal daily transit capacity, 36 to 38 vessels per day, was cut in stages to 32 in July 2023, 31 in September, 24 by November, and eventually to just 18 ships per day by February 2024, roughly half of ordinary capacity. Draft restrictions accompanied these cuts, forcing vessels to load less cargo so they would sit higher in water and require less water to be lifted through the locks. The operational consequences were immediate. At the peak of the crisis, more than 160 vessels were queued waiting for transit slots, with waiting times stretching as long as 17 days for some ships. The analytical takeaway is this: the 2023-2024 disruption was not a mechanical failure of the infrastructure, it was a climate failure of infrastructure. A 110-year-old system engineered around 20th century rainfall assumptions, colliding with the 21st century climate that no longer reliably matches those assumptions.
So what happened in the Panama Canal? So what's its impact to the global supply chain and what are the solutions for it? So every disruption in global trade eventually results into a number, and the Panama Canal crisis produced several sobering ones. The Panama Canal Authority estimated the drought cost it between $500 million and $700 million in lost revenue in first fiscal year 2024 alone, far exceeding its initial $200 million projections. Total vessel transit for the year fell 29%, dropping to under 10,000. Compared with over 12,600 the year prior, for the global shipping industry as whole, the reduction in the canal throughout it's estimated to have cost companies roughly $3 billion in lost efficiency savings in 2024 compared with normal operating year. These figures translated directly into freight markets. Shipping rates from China to United States rose as much as 36% during the worst of the crisis. Rates from transporting liquefied petroleum gas from Houston to Japan hit all-time high of $150 per ton by September 2024. And American grain exporters reported paying up to $10 additional per ton simply to move soybeans corn to Asian buyers, a direct erosion of competitiveness from US agriculture in international markets. And crucially, this was not confined to obscure commodities. reported delayed cargo included consumer toys, automotive parts, solar panels, components, and perhaps most consequently, medical supplies, including insulins and diabetes testing equipments. With Panama constrained and the Suez Canal simultaneously disrupted by Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, shipping companies had a few good alternatives. Many rerouted around Cape of Good Hope at a southern tip of Africa, a duo adding 1 to 2 weeks substantial fuel cost to each work. Traffic via Cape rose by an estimated 89% during this period, and any longer routes also meant higher emissions. One estimate placed to add EU carbon trading cost for a single large container ships devoting around Cape at roughly $400,000 per boat. The flagship long-term solution is a new reservoir on the Rio Indo, a river west of the canal. Exists watershed estimated at $1.6 billion. The project would require relocating approximately 2,000 residents whose land would be flooded. As a secondary plan, cloud seeding can be used to increase rainfall by helping clouds produce more water droplets. However, it has limitation because it only works when suitable clouds are available and cannot create rain on its own. The amount of extra water gained in uncertain, so it would be used only as a supporting method along with other water solutions. A parallel initiative to deepen the Galton Lake's navigational channel would increase the lake's total water storage capacity by estimated 45% by adding roughly 300 million gallons of daily water output without requiring an entirely new reservoir. And for energy cargo specifically, the canal authorities developed a cross isthmus pipeline allowing liquefied gas to move from Atlantic side to the Pacific side over land by passing water dependent locks for the category of trade altogether. This documentary shows that the future of the Panama Canal depends on adapting to a changing climate. Though water-saving operations, new reservoir, expanding storage capacity, alternative transportation solutions, Panama is working to protect one of the world's most important trade routes. However, these solutions also involve economic, environmental, and social challenges. The larger message is that infrastructure built for that past must be redesigned and strengthened to meet the demand of a warmer and more unpredictable climate.